I'm going to sort of kick off this panel, and I guess we'll whip it the shape as we go.
Well, hello to everyone.
So I'm Kathy Schuit. I'm a writer of children's books, and I do my own illustrations since 2017. I've been doing classes on helping other writers to learn to illustrate their own work, or at least to create viable pictures that can be used in poetry and memoir, as well as children's books. I formerly owned a restaurant and was a journalist and magazine editor and writer.
And I'm Jacqueline Loring, and at heart, I'm a poet. I began writing primarily poetry, went on to take a screenwriting class and fell in love with that. And over the years have moved on to nonfiction. I was recently part of the Chemo Theater book, which just won second place in the National Federation of Press Women Award. And my newest book last year, besides the chemo book, was Vietnam Veterans Unbroken: Conversations on Trauma and Resiliency.
I'm Sarah Baker, and I am a fiction author. I've been writing fiction since 1997. Had my first book published in 2001, and that was followed by 20 or so more. So I haven't actually been writing a lot lately, but I'm looking forward to getting back into it.
Sarah, let me just say one last thing too, because I was distracted.
Sure.
For people who haven't been with us before, I'm also the editor of the SouthWest Sage newsletter, which is the newsletter of SouthWest writers, and which also won a National Federation of Press Women third place award. So we're really proud of all of our collective awards from the NFPW.
All right. We wanted to start with this quick quote, because I think what's so important about this is we're all writers, but we're also readers. And if you aren't a reader and you're trying to write, you're probably going to have some trouble. Reading, I love this quote, reading is an exercise in empathy. It's an exercise in walking in someone else's shoes for a while. And that is so true. What we've discovered is that people who are avid readers tend to be more empathetic in general. And that's, I think, why the writers are so much fun to be around. So really, what literature reading helps us with is living through the past, because we actually get to step into somebody's shoes in the past. It helps us empathize with people who are unlike us. And it also enables us to envision a future. And I think that's one of the key elements about this pandemic and being locked in our houses for so long, is sometimes it's hard to see a future. But literature can help us with that. It's sometimes not a good future, but still a future. So it's important to think about. And then, of course, the big thing for a lot of us right now is simply escaping the present with good books or stories. So what we want to do is we want to share with you some of the books that have helped us in one of these categories, and also encourage you to share with all of us in the chat box other titles that you really feel strongly about that are fitting into these categories. And we're going to do this just very quickly, giving you one or two of each of our books in these areas. And then talking about how that's making us better writers, because that's really the key here, is how is reading helping us improve our writing. You guys want to include anything else before we move on?
Sarah, were we going to try to include the reading suggestions from the chat box into a list in the Sage? Were we going to try to compile that?
Yes, we are. Thank you, Kathy. I did forget that point.
Okay.
Yes, the idea here is if you put suggestions in the chat box, these will be included in the newsletter, the next newsletter that comes out. That's what our intent is. So what we're creating here is an amazing reading list, a reading list from authors. How cool is that? So I'm going to kick this off talking about living through the past. One of the books that's really impacted me and allowed me to live through something relatively horrendous in the past is Last Citadel by David L. Robbins. The book was published in 2010. It's historical fiction, and it's about the Battle of Kursk, the last big push by the Nazis in World War II. And it's an amazing story, but really impacted my writing in helping me understand how to better characterize people. He really follows several people through the events, but it does it in such a way that you don't skip over anything. And that's so amazing to me as a writer, to tell the story of many people. So that's the book I picked out for living through the past. And Kathy, I think you're up next.
So one of my favorite books that helped me to understand a circumstance in the past was this book called Molokai. And it's the story of a 7-year-old girl who came up with the symptoms of leprosy and was torn from everyone else in her family at 7 years old and sent to the island of Molokai, which I never even knew anything about until I went to Hawaii, and a tour happened to mention that Molokai was once called the leprosy island. So the way that this book helped me and helped me to grow and to improve my writing was that I realized that there's stigma around a lot of things, and those stigmas still exist today. I also tend to read things and then I do more research on the subject. And on this subject, I found that until 2015, 6 people still lived on Molokai, and all of them were sent there as children due to having contracted leprosy. So these stigmas don't go away just because there's been a cure for leprosy for more than 75 years now. And these people were expected to die immediately. They lived full lives. They had children. They got married. They created a whole society on this island. So it was a really insightful book. So News of the World was also one of mine. I know a lot of people have read News of the World. And this book, it takes place shortly after the Civil War, and it follows a Black man for whom the war has taken everything. And he travels around the central part of the United States, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and reads the newspapers that he finds from the East to make money. He just sets it up as a reading. Being short on cash, he decides to take a job of transporting a young girl who's been rescued from the Kiowa tribe back to her family in Texas. It's a 400-mile journey that they take together. And of course, you know, there's all of this is a Black man traveling with a little white girl. The reason that I love Paulette Giles is because her writing is something that I would like to emulate. She has an incredible ability to look at multiple sides of really thorny issues and help you to empathize with all the sides, and to see that even though there are certain individuals you really want to dislike them, and yet you can't, because you see their side of that story as well as the others. And I just love her.
That looks like me.
That is you, Jacqueline.
The picture that you see up there is actually the poster for a movie. But I'd like to start out my part of this this event by giving you a challenge. There's a wonderful book called Changing Skies, and from a bestseller. And from that book, the screenplay for Jojo Rabbit was written. The movie won the Academy Award. You probably know the adapted screenplay also won an Academy Award this year. So what I'm going to challenge people to do is to read the book, Changing Skies, and then watch the movie, Jojo Rabbit, and see how a book changes, how it is adapted from the book to a movie. And if that interests you, Many of you may already know that you can go online, and we'll put the websites in that list of books that Kathy's going to do. You can go online and you can get the screenplay for almost any movie that you would like to read the screenplay for. And there's no cost, so don't ever pay any money. So if you're still looking for adventures in writing and reading during this event, I suggest you read the book, watch the movie, and then go to the internet and read the screenplay. Reading a screenplay is sometimes a task for people who are used to reading prose or poetry. But reading a screenplay can give the prose writer a very different look at what writing is like. A prose writer has a page or a chapter to describe something. Screenwriter has a sentence. And so it might be great fun, if you're still looking for adventures in reading and writing, to do those three things and see how a book changes to a screenplay. And the James Patterson one is also mine. I love books that have redemption at the end. This is a story of a Lindsay Boxer, who's got, there's 18 or so books about her. She's a detective in LA. A woman approaches her and asks her to help her to decide whether walking down the street in front of them is a notorious international killer. It's about war crimes and the vindication of this woman at the end. It's really quite interesting.
Thank you both. One of the, I think the most important thing about reading any literature, reading any writing, including poetry, fiction, nonfiction, scripts, whatever you're reading, is that it does help us understand and empathize with people who live lives that we will never live. And this was just such a great category for me. I have so many books, I had to choose one. So I did choose just one because it was so impactful. The one I chose was Becoming Nicole by Amy Ellis Nutt. This is a true story about a young woman who has started life as a boy, and she was one of twins. She started life as Wyatt, and her twin brother is Jonas. And she's transgender, and certainly something that I thought I knew more about than I really did. Her journey from the time she was a year and a half old until she finally started presenting as a woman was an amazing journey with lots of obstacles to overcome. And the book is also about her entire family and all of their travels through this journey. So I think it's something I recommend. And to me, it was the idea of being able to put a nonfiction in that was so engaging. It really sucked me right in. And it's a wonderful story. I recommend that one.
So The Blue Sweater, this is a book that starts off with a young teenage girl who was given a blue sweater by her uncle. And it was, kids at her high school made fun of the sweater. And even though she loved it, she had put her name on it. She didn't want to be made fun of. So she put the sweater in the Salvation Army box. And years later, in her 20s, she was in Rwanda. She was part of a group who was there to establish a microfinance institution for poor women. And she saw her sweater walking across the street, and she actually approached the person and looked for the tag, and her name was actually in the sweater. So this is her true story of her journey to help people in Rwanda, help women especially, but through the Help for Women to help their families. This book actually completely opened my eyes to how differently we, especially as Americans, feel about our gifting to other countries and how it is actually perceived and accepted or even not accepted. And it goes over her struggle in trying to understand sometimes even how to get these people to accept the help that was being offered to them, because they have they just have a different culture. It helped me to really understand the culture. It changed the way I give my charitable gifts and what I look for in a charitable organization. And it's a really great book.
I have a lot of favorite poets, but Mary Oliver is up there at the very, very top. I'm from Cape Cod, and I had the privilege to hear Mary read her poetry several times. Actually, she was quite reclusive. This book I bought a few years ago, but I take it out every once in a while. This is the book of poems that she wrote celebrating the life and her relationship with her longtime partner. There's something about Mary Oliver poems. Anyone could read them, a child could read them and just find wonderful images of the natural world. One of my favorite poems is about her keeping her rocks and watering them and taking care of them. But there are layers and layers of thought in each one of her poems. So I included that as one of the books that really helps me to empathize with other people, but it also is a book that rewards me every time I read that, or the newest one I carry around with me in the pocket of my van. And this is a new book that I just read. It's called The Gift of Forgiveness. It has a longer name. The Gift of Forgiveness, Inspiring Stories from Those Who Have Overcome the Unforgivable. And the author interviewed about 24 people who have come through tremendous tragedies. A parent of a child from Sandy Hook, people whose spouses cheated on them, people who were abused, some people who were fired for the most amazing reasons. And what she did was she talked to these people, and each one of them talked that anger and the rage they had over the situation, and then how they realized that unless they could forgive, their life was diminished. And it's a wonderful, rewarding book to read. If you have an incident in your life that you're still holding on to and you would like to get rid of it, you'd like to just be over it, this would be the book to read.
Thank you both. We included the category of helping us see the future, and we asked which books really help you see a future of humankind, either good or bad. And one of the reasons I was excited about this category is I'm writing future right now. So I've been reading a lot of sci-fi set in the future. One of the really classic books I understand, and is something that I just read because of lockdown, was A Canticle for Leibowitz. It's written in 1959. It was published by Walter Miller Jr., and it's post-apocalyptic sci-fi. It was written in a time when the only apocalypse we could think of was a nuclear war, and so it's about the people after a nuclear war. And it's really focused in the Southwest, and a particular group of monks who are preserving science, but they don't actually understand what it is they're preserving. Really fascinating book, a lot of interesting ideas, and it deals with the cyclical thought of humankind. So after this apocalypse, then people get back the ability to create technological marvels, create another bomb, and they drop it again. So it starts going into a cycle. Very interesting book. If you're going to write post-apocalyptic fiction, you really need to read this one. Then the other one I wanted to share, because it's also set in the Southwest, was The Water Knife. Somebody else recommended it to me. An amazing book that answers the question, what happens if one person owns all the water rights in the Southwest United States? It's a gritty story, it's gripping, it's a little hard to read, and a very personal tale. So if you're wanting to write something that will engage the reader in the future, think about reading this one, what kind of question you want to ask, and then have your character answer. And you can't get your readers more involved in this, I promise. Really highly recommend it.
So generally, my preference for reading is historical fiction, but I also really enjoyed this book by Peter Diamandis. I'm sure everyone knows who he is. He's probably one of the most forward-thinking individuals of our time, And he's the CEO of dozens of companies focused on not just waiting for the future, but on creating it. Abundance focuses on the positive stance that the world, quote, will soon be able to meet and exceed the basic needs of every man, woman, and child on the planet. Obviously, he's really optimistic about our ability to get it together, and I like that. But this particular statement is why I read the book. He has a quote by Margaret Mead at the beginning that says, and we've heard this before, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. This book really has changed the way I look at my news. And because of it, I don't really follow mainstream news anymore. Instead, I listen to podcasts that I select. And I follow younger podcasters who report on the developments in things like biohacking, the Genomic X Prize, which is a challenge for accurately sequencing 100 human genomes, and on progress toward improving the world's human conditions, defeating disease and ignorance, and reversing the certainty of aging. These things I think are way more important, and they're kind of put forward in the book as the things that we all need to have more of our attention focused on is working towards solutions for the problem rather than allowing the mainstream media to get us mired in just the problems. So if you want to, a positive outlook, that's Abundance.
The book that I suggested for this, I read it because I was hoping that what it would tell me is that in the future, the harassment of women and the sexual abuse of women, we would recognize it more fully, therefore it wouldn't be as much of an issue. What I found in this book was it reads like a novel. Ronan Farrow is a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. He got an assignment from NBC to talk with a woman who said that she was raped and sexually harassed by a famous movie industry person. Farrow took that, interviewed several women, followed Harvey Weinstein, and as the book gets going, it goes into several other very famous cases, includes the National Enquirer. Just when he thinks he's finished the story, he gets fired because the people at NBC did not want this story to come out. He then discovers that he's being tracked by some killers. And like I say, it reads like a novel, but at the same time you're hearing all of that, he tells you in the beginning, this is not about my life. This is not about my father. This is not about my mother. And then he discovers that it really has a lot to do with his life growing up and the sexual abuse allegations within his own family. So it turned out to be just an absolutely fascinating read.
Finally, our fourth and final category is what we've been reading to escape the present. And I really had a great time with this one too, because there's so many choices. But one of the books, the one in fact that I just recently finished that I enjoyed, was Bill Bryson's A Walk in the Woods. And the fun part about this is that my whole family is now reading it. So we talk about it each day and I find out how far they've gotten. This was a story that's really, it's nonfiction, and it reads like it is a travel book, but it definitely reads like a novel. And that's, to me, one of the lessons here is that you can do some amazing things with travel books. He includes a lot of information as he and his friend, someone he hasn't seen for a long time, decide to walk the Appalachian Trail or part of it. And he includes a lot of historical information about the trail and tips about hiking, but he does it in a totally non-intrusive way. It is a riot. Bill Bryson's books are hysterical, and now I'm working on reading more of them. So I recommend this as an escape. I felt like I was walking in the woods, and it was wonderful.
So The Color of Lightning is another book by Paulette Giles. And because I really do like historical fiction, they're really such a great escape for me. I get so much out of it. This book is also set shortly after the end of the Civil War. And this one is about a newly freed slave family that ends up ending in migrating to Texas, where they try to settle on a homestead. The mother, both children, and several other people from the surrounding settlement, women and children, are captured by a band, a mixed band of Kiowa and Apache Indians. The author, Paulette Giles, again, one of my favorite things about her, and the reason I took up this book is because News of the World ended and I couldn't believe it was over. So I had to read this immediately. But because what I love so much about her is her ability to, she didn't hold back on the horrific crimes that were committed by this band of young natives against these women and children. But their side of this issue, their side of how their own people have been hurt by the US policies and the military, and what has driven them to kind of seek restitution and revenge for this on the settlers, you get such a deep understanding of what is happening with all of these different involved groups of the time. And to me, the insight and the learning curve is just so incredible that they are a great escape. So the next book is Feck Perfection. And this is a book about, it's written by a great graphics designer, and it really explores the dangerous nature of artists of all kinds, including writers, and it encourages you, if you're having any kind of a meltdown, a feeling of not being able to cope with isolation any longer, or losing of your writing purpose, this is a great book for re-energizing that and giving you a reason to keep going and to keep doing it, because you are a dangerous person.
The book that I didn't put down for Sarah's list, I'm a Stone Barrington junkie. Anything Stillwood writes about Stone Barrington, I read it the day it comes out. And there's only like 30 or 40 or something books in the series. And if I can't sleep at night, I pull up one from the library and listen to it, even if I've listened to it 10 times. But the book what I did say was an escape for me is Parasite. I wish I could have a show of hands as to how many people actually saw this movie. I was fascinated by this movie. There are so many things in it, in the streets of South Korea, that I would not be able to put an image to. I thought that the screenplay the movie did a great job of that, but I needed a book. I needed something I could read. So again, this screenplay is on the internet, and you can read it, and it is fascinating. So an escape to a place and a time that you don't live in, Parasite's a great read.
Thank you both. So we'd like to open this up now to people who, first of all, have questions about anything. And if you're wondering about the books that we've shared, the list will be in the newsletter. So if you missed any of them, you'll see the name of the author and the title. And then we're going to share those that other people have included. And if you want to share a title and you haven't put it in the chat, please do so by sending it to info@swriters.com. And it'll be included in our list. So I think this is going to be really fun to have a big list of books for everybody to read for the rest of this year and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Sarah, Jacqueline, and Kathy.
Thank you, guys. Great
Thank
talk.
you.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Bye. Be well.